in the Dark: The New Nightmare is the sequel to the classic original, but has little in terms of connection outside of a few names, Easter eggs, and a general theme. In a way, the pre-rendered backgrounds and textured characters remind me more of Resident Evil than the original game, but that's not to say that this is a rip-off of Resident Evil. It has plenty of ideas of its own. The big one is how light and dark play into the game, to the point where there are even monsters that can only be killed by turning the lights on. The weapons in the game are all light based, and the lighting effects from your torch beam is pretty good for the time. The plot has you being sent to a house on the mysterious Shadow Island to investigate a case and to help translate some tablets that were found. On the way, your plane is attacked by a monster, and the two characters escape via parachute, one landing on the roof and the other in the forest outside of the house. From there, you pick one of the two characters, Edward Carnby or Aline. Like in Resident Evil, they each have their own unique adventure that loosely line up with each other, each getting unique weapons and taking a different path through mostly the same content. Like other survival horror games, you'll manage limited resources, solve puzzles, and read notes and diaries for clues and backstory. But the game falls short of greatness due to some stumbles in its design. For example, sometimes enemies will respawn when you leave a room. In a game with limited finite ammo and no backup weapon, and cryptic puzzles that require a lot of backtracking, having enemies respawn is just bad design. Dodging is not really viable most of the time due to the narrow hallways. It's easy to avoid most of these areas once you know where they are, but expect to waste ammo finding that out. The game also has a nasty habit of putting enemies right at the door so that you take a hit immediately upon entering the room. This only happens a few times in the game, so it's not the end of the world, but it's irritating in a game where, again, supplies are finite and limited. The puzzle design is subpar. The overall design can be a bit lacking, unlocking a room to get a key to unlock another room to get another key, but I had to resort to a guide more than once, not because I couldn't figure out a puzzle, but I couldn't figure out how to execute it. For example, one puzzle required pushing certain books in the library. I knew the order to push the books in, but the books you have to push don't stand out in any way, and even walking along the wall mashing the button, I somehow missed them. Another was near the end of the game. I had to recite a spell, and I rightly guessed that the spell would be somewhere in the numerous books and diaries I'd picked up, but after spending longer than I'd like searching them, I found nothing that matched the words that I had the option of choosing from. It turns out you have to transcribe the spell by ear from a dictaphone picked up early in the game, simply labelled dictaphone. Not only that, but the spell is the first few seconds in a, let's say, minute-long audio clip. There's also an overall clunkiness to the game. It's hard to describe, but little things like the time to load the inventory seem to be about the same as Resident Evil, but here it always feels like everything is just a tiny bit slower than I'd like. Maybe the camera changes more often or something. Aiming was another issue. Sometimes the gun didn't fire if I tapped the button, and shots seemed to go through enemies unless I waited that extra half second for the character to aim at the enemy specifically. It might sound like I don't like the game or that it has a lot of problems, and I guess that's the case, but where the game excels is in atmosphere. The overall tone of the early game is thick with a creepy, haunted house vibe, more so than Resident Evil. From the dusty, exposed floorboards of the attic to the extravagant library, it's all very well done and makes a good Halloween or just general spooky mansion game. The game had some moments that I found scary when I first played it as a teenager, and they stuck with me until I was an adult and replayed the game. Like a flash of lightning that showed my character surrounded by monsters for a quick moment, only to be left alone in the dark, hastily running back to the light switch. Or the double bluff scare involving a cupboard. As an adult, these barely fazed me, but I still remember them years later. The monster designs are great too. The standard dogs, zombies, and oversized insects are present, but the rest of the monsters have unique designs that make sense or are just off the wall and crazy. Overall, I like the designs. All that said, I'm hesitant to recommend the game to anyone except die-hard survival horror fans. The gameplay is just too clunky and lacking that final layer of polish. It saps much of the fun from the game. I also think that the game starts to fall apart by the end. It's a shame because there's some good atmosphere here behind the clunkiness.